What happens when one of music's most beloved legends sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat, only to face a host who seems determined to provoke him at every turn? In just 37 seconds, a simple question about age would ignite a firestorm that would end with security escorting a Beatle off the stage. The morning started like any other on the Lorraine Kelly show. The lights were bright, the studio audience was buzzing with excitement, and Paul McCartney, looking relaxed in a casual blazer, settled into the famous sofa. Beside Lorraine sat her regular panelists, entertainment correspondent Ross King and lifestyle expert Fiona Phillips. The energy felt warm, almost celebratory. After all, it wasn't every day that a living legend graced the morning show. Lorraine opened with her trademark smile, leaning forward with enthusiasm. Paul McCartney, everyone. What an absolute honor to have you here. Now, you've been in this business for, about 100 years now? The audience laughed politely, though there was an edge to the comment that Paul seemed to notice. He smiled graciously. Well, not quite 100, Lorraine, but I've been fortunate enough to do what I love for a very long time. Ross King jumped in, sensing the slight tension. Paul, you're looking fantastic. What's the secret to staying so energetic after all these years? Paul brightened. Thank you, Ross. I think it's about staying curious, you know? I still wake up excited to write music, to play. That keeps you young. Lorraine wasn't about to let the conversation flow naturally. She cut across Ross with a sharp laugh. Staying curious? Is that what we're calling it? I mean, some might say you're just refusing to accept that your time has passed. The studio went quiet. Fiona Phillips shifted uncomfortably in her seat, exchanging a quick glance with Ross. Paul's smile faded slightly, but he maintained his composure. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. Oh, come on, Paul. You know exactly what I mean. You're out here touring, releasing albums, acting like you're still relevant. Don't you think it's time to step aside and let the younger generation have their moment? The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't playful banter. This was an attack. Paul sat back, his expression hardening. Lorraine, with respect, I don't think making music has an age limit. If people want to listen, I'll keep creating. Ross tried to intervene again, his voice diplomatic. And people absolutely do want to listen, Paul. Your recent tour sold out in minutes. But Lorraine wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed emboldened by the shocked reactions around her. Sold out to nostalgia seekers, you mean? People who can't let go of the past. It's quite sad, really. Fiona finally spoke up, her tone careful. Lorraine, I think that's a bit harsh. Paul's contributions to music are timeless. Lorraine shot Fiona a look that could freeze water. Oh, please, Fiona. Timeless? The Beatles were 60 years ago. 60 years. Do you know how long that is? That's like someone in the 60s still going on about music hall performers from the turn of the century. Paul's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the armrest of the sofa. The Beatles ended over 50 years ago. Yes, but I've made plenty of music since then. Wings, my solo work. Are you familiar with any of it? The question was pointed, and Lorraine didn't like it. Her face flushed. Of course I'm familiar with it. I'm a professional broadcaster. But let's be honest. None of it compares to the Beatles, does it? You've been chasing that high for decades. The audience was completely silent now. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Ross looked horrified. Lorraine, maybe we should move on to talking about Paul's new project. But Paul raised a hand. No, Ross. It's all right. I'd like to hear more about what Lorraine thinks. He turned to face the host directly. You seem to have quite a few opinions about my career. Tell me, what would you have me do? Retire? Disappear? Stop doing the thing I love because you've decided I'm too old? Lorraine leaned back, crossing her arms. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're clinging to fame. It's desperate. It's undignified. Fiona gasped. Lorraine, that's completely out of line. Ross nodded vigorously. absolutely out of line. Paul, I apologize on behalf of the show. But Lorraine cut him off. Don't apologize for me, Ross. I'm entitled to my opinion, and this is my show. Paul stood up slowly, not dramatically, not with anger, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had reached their limit. You know what, Lorraine? You're absolutely right. This is your show, and I don't need to be on it. Lorraine's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected this response. Oh, sit down, Paul. Don't be so sensitive. Sensitive? Paul's voice was calm but firm. You've spent the last 5 minutes insulting my life's work, my passion, my age. You've been condescending and rude. And now you're telling me I'm being sensitive? The audience began to murmur. A few people started clapping in support of Paul. Ross stood up as well, looking between Paul and Lorraine. Paul, please. We value having you here. Paul gave Ross a kind smile. I appreciate that, Ross. You've been nothing but gracious, but I won't sit here and be disrespected. Lorraine's face had gone from flushed to pale. She seemed to realize she'd pushed too far, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. Disrespected? I asked you legitimate questions. If you can't handle a bit of tough journalism, maybe you are too old for this. That was the breaking point. Paul shook his head slowly. Tough journalism? Is that what you call this? Lorraine, I've done thousands of interviews. I've been asked challenging questions by some of the best journalists in the world. What you're doing isn't journalism. It's cruelty disguised as honesty. Fiona stood up now too, her hand on Paul's arm. Paul, you don't have to leave. Lorraine, apologize. Now. But Lorraine sat frozen, her mouth a thin line. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. I don't apologize for speaking the truth. Paul nodded slowly. Then we have nothing more to say to each other. He began removing his microphone, carefully unclipping it from his collar. A producer rushed onto the stage, looking panicked. Mr. McCartney, please, can we just take a quick break and sort this out? The producer pleaded. Paul handed the microphone to the producer with a gentle smile. There's nothing to sort out. I came here in good faith to talk about music, to connect with people who might enjoy what I do. I didn't come here to be torn down by someone who seems to have a personal vendetta. Lorraine finally found her voice again, but it came out defensive and sharp. A vendetta? Don't flatter yourself, Paul. You're not that important. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Several people booed. Ross put his head in his hands. Fiona looked at Lorraine with genuine shock. Lorraine, what is wrong with you? Paul just smiled sadly. You know what the really unfortunate thing is, Lorraine? I've always respected you as a broadcaster. I've watched your show. I thought you had warmth, intelligence. But today, you've shown me something else entirely. Lorraine shot up from her seat, pointing at Paul. How dare you come on my show and lecture me about respect? You sit there with your legacy, your millions, your adoring fans, and you lecture me? Ross stepped between them. Lorraine, stop. Just stop. But she didn't stop. No, Ross. I'm tired of these legends coming on and expecting to be worshipped. We're supposed to just bow down and say how wonderful they are? Well, I won't do it. I ask real questions. Paul's voice cut through her rant, quiet but clear. You didn't ask questions, Lorraine. You made accusations. You attacked. There's a difference. Fiona moved closer to Paul, her voice soft. Paul, I'm so sorry. This isn't what any of us expected. He patted her hand kindly. I know, Fiona. Thank you for trying. He turned to Ross. And thank you, Ross. You're a good man. Then he looked back at Lorraine one final time. I hope whatever anger you're carrying that made you behave this way finds some peace. I genuinely mean that. Lorraine's face contorted with rage. Get out. Get off my stage. Paul raised an eyebrow. I was already leaving, Lorraine. You don't need to make it a command. She moved toward him, her finger still pointing. I said get out. Security! 2 security guards appeared from the wings, looking extremely uncomfortable. One of them spoke quietly. Mr. McCartney, we'll walk you out. Paul nodded. Thank you, gentlemen. He turned to the audience and gave a small wave. Thank you all for coming today. I'm sorry you had to witness this. The audience erupted in applause. People stood up. Someone shouted, "We love you, Paul." Others joined in with supportive calls. Lorraine stood there, arms crossed, watching as the legend she'd just attacked received a standing ovation. Her panelists wouldn't look at her. Ross was shaking his head. Fiona had tears in her eyes. As Paul walked toward the exit with the security guards, one of them said quietly, "That took a lot of class, sir." Paul smiled. I've learned over the years that how people treat you says more about them than it does about you. Behind him, he could hear Lorraine trying to regain control of her show. All right. Settle down, everyone. We have a show to finish. Let's move on to our next segment. But the audience wasn't settling down. The boos had started. Lorraine's voice grew shriller. I said settle down. This is my show, and we're moving on. Ross's voice came through, trying to be professional. Perhaps we should take that break now. The last thing Paul heard before the studio doors closed behind him was Lorraine shouting at her own audience, demanding respect, demanding attention, demanding control she'd just lost completely. In the green room, Paul sat down and accepted a cup of tea from a young production assistant who looked mortified. I'm so sorry, Mr. McCartney. That was awful. Paul took a sip of tea and smiled. These things happen. People have bad days. That was more than a bad day, the assistant said. That was cruel. Paul considered this. Maybe, but responding with cruelty in return wouldn't make anything better, would it? The assistant shook her head. You're very kind. I try to be, Paul said simply. Life's too short to carry anger around. Back in the studio, Ross and Fiona were having a heated conversation with Lorraine during the commercial break. Through the green room monitor, Paul could see them gesturing, their faces serious. Lorraine sat with her arms crossed, shaking her head repeatedly. When the show came back from break, Lorraine's face was composed, but her eyes were hard. Welcome back. We've had an unexpected departure, but we're professionals here, and the show goes on. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just cold professionalism masking what had been a complete meltdown of civility. Fiona spoke up, her voice tight. I think our viewers deserve to know that what happened was not representative of how guests should be treated. Lorraine's head snapped toward her. Fiona, we're moving on. No, Fiona said firmly. We're not. Paul McCartney is a legend who deserves respect. What happened here was wrong. Ross nodded. Absolutely wrong. And I want to apologize to Paul and to our viewers. Lorraine's face went red again. You're apologizing on my show? Someone needs to, Ross said, quietly. The tension was visible even through the monitor. Paul watched as Lorraine struggled to maintain control, her panelists essentially in revolt. The show limped through the rest of its running time, but the damage was done. A producer knocked on the green room door. Mr. McCartney, your car is ready whenever you are. Paul stood, straightening his jacket. Thank you. I appreciate your kindness today. The producer smiled sadly. I've worked on this show for 3 years. I've never seen anything like that. I'm embarrassed. Don't be, Paul said. You didn't do anything wrong. None of the crew did. These things happen in live television. As Paul walked through the backstage corridors toward the exit, crew members stopped what they were doing. Some applauded quietly. Others just nodded with respect. One older cameraman shook his hand. You handled that with more grace than she deserved, sir. Paul squeezed his hand. Thank you, my friend. Outside, the winter air was crisp and cold. Paul's car was waiting, the driver holding the door open. Before getting in, Paul paused and looked back at the studio building. Inside, Lorraine Kelly was finishing her show, probably already planning how to spin this, how to justify her behavior. But Paul knew the truth. So did everyone who had witnessed it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away with your dignity intact. The driver closed the door and the car pulled away from the curb. Inside the studio, credits were rolling. Lorraine sat at her desk, smile frozen on her face, while her panelists looked anywhere but at her. In those 37 seconds, when Lorraine had first attacked Paul's age, she had set in motion a chain of events that would define her morning. She had taken a friendly interview with a beloved legend and turned it into a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. Paul had come to share his passion for music. He had come in friendship and openness. He had left the same way, refusing to let someone else's bitterness diminish who he was. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. On one side, a host who believed her platform gave her the right to be cruel. On the other, a legend who understood that true strength lies in grace under pressure. As the car navigated London traffic, Paul pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his daughter. Just finished a rather eventful interview. Remind me to tell you about it. Love you. Back in the studio, the audience was filing out, many of them talking animatedly about what they'd witnessed. Social media was already exploding with reactions, but Paul wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the next song he wanted to write, about the melody that had been floating in his head all morning, about the things that actually mattered. Because that's what legends do. They don't waste time on pettiness or revenge. They create. They move forward. They remember what's important. Lorraine had tried to make Paul feel small, to diminish his achievements, to paint him as a has been clinging to former glory. Instead, she had revealed her own insecurities, her own need to tear down others to feel significant. Paul had simply stood up and walked away. No shouting, no insults, just quiet dignity and an understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting because you've already won just by being who you are. The show was over. The cameras had stopped rolling. But the impact of those moments would linger far longer than any of them expected. In the green room back at the studio, Ross and Fiona sat together, not speaking. They'd tried to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. Lorraine had shown her true colors, and there was no taking it back. A young intern poked his head in. Lorraine wants to see you both in her dressing room. Ross and Fiona exchanged looks. Tell her we'll be there in a moment, Fiona said. The intern left, and Ross turned to Fiona. What do you think she wants? Fiona sighed. Probably to tell us we overstepped by defending Paul. We did the right thing, Ross said firmly. I know we did, Fiona agreed. But I don't think Lorraine sees it that way. They were right. When they entered Lorraine's dressing room, she was pacing back and forth, her face still flushed with anger. How dare you two undermine me on my own show? Ross stayed calm. We didn't undermine you, Lorraine. We stood up for what was right. Paul McCartney walked off my show. Do you understand how that makes me look? Lorraine's voice was rising. Fiona stepped forward. How you look? Lorraine, you verbally attacked a beloved music icon for no reason. You insulted him, dismissed his career, and then acted surprised when he left. I was asking tough questions, Lorraine insisted. No, Ross said quietly. You were being cruel. There's a difference. Lorraine spun to face him. I don't need a lecture from you about how to conduct an interview. Apparently you do, Fiona said, her patience clearly worn thin, because what happened out there was a disgrace. Meanwhile, Paul's car had reached his hotel. The driver opened the door, and Paul stepped out into the afternoon light. A few fans who had been waiting outside rushed over, and Paul stopped to sign autographs and take photos. We saw what happened on the show, one fan said. You were brilliant. She was horrible. Paul smiled kindly. Let's not dwell on negativity. Did you enjoy the music we talked about before things got complicated? The fan nodded enthusiastically. Always. You're an inspiration. That's very kind of you to say, Paul replied, signing her album. Keep listening to music. Keep finding joy in it. That's what matters. As he headed into the hotel lobby, Paul felt lighter. The confrontation had been unpleasant, certainly, but he hadn't compromised himself. He hadn't stooped to Lorraine's level. He had simply refused to participate in her game. Back at the studio, the argument in Lorraine's dressing room had reached a crescendo. If you two can't support me, then maybe you shouldn't be on my panel, Lorraine shouted. Ross stood up. If being on your panel means watching you bully guests and staying silent, then you're right. Maybe we shouldn't be here. Fiona stood too. I've been proud to work on this show, Lorraine, but not today. Today, I'm ashamed of what we broadcast. Lorraine pointed at the door. Get out, both of you. They left without another word, leaving Lorraine alone with her anger and her pride. Outside the dressing room, they paused. Did we just quit? Fiona asked. Ross shrugged. I think we might have, and honestly, I feel okay about it. Fiona nodded slowly. Me too. The fallout from the interview spread quickly. Viewers who had watched live were sharing their thoughts. The studio audience members were giving their accounts. And through it all, one thing remained clear. Paul McCartney had walked into that studio as a legend, and left as one too. Lorraine Kelly had walked in as a respected host, and left as something far less. In his hotel room, Paul sat by the window, looking out over London. He thought about the young musicians starting out, the struggles they would face, the criticism they would endure. He hoped they would learn what he had learned over decades in the spotlight. That your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. That grace under pressure is more powerful than any angry retort. That the best response to cruelty is often simply to walk away. Lorraine, in her dressing room, stared at her reflection in the mirror. The makeup that had looked perfect hours ago now seemed garish. The confident smile she'd worn felt like a mask that had slipped. She had wanted to be tough, to ask the questions others wouldn't. But somewhere along the way, she had crossed a line from challenging to cruel. And now, she was alone with the consequences. The show would go on tomorrow. There would be new guests, new topics, new opportunities. But this moment, this interview, this choice to attack rather than engage, would follow her. Paul picked up his guitar, the same one he'd brought to play on the show if the interview had gone well. He strummed a few chords, letting the music wash over him. This was what mattered. This was what endured. Not the drama, not the confrontation, not the ego battles or the power plays. Just the music, just the art, just the connection between a melody and the human heart. He began to play, soft and low, a new song forming in his mind. It was about resilience, about staying true to yourself, about knowing when to stand firm and when to walk away. The notes drifted through the hotel room, simple and pure. Outside, London continued its busy day, unaware and uncaring about the morning's drama. Inside, a legend created, because that's what legends do. They create, they endure, they rise above. And sometimes the bravest thing they do is simply refuse to engage with those who seek to bring them down. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In a few hours, the evening news would cover the story. Tomorrow, the papers would have their takes. Next week, something new would capture everyone's attention. But for now, in this moment, Paul McCartney sat with his guitar and played. Not for an audience. Not for applause. Not to prove anything to anyone. Just because he loved it. Just because he could. Just because, after all these years, the music still mattered most. And that, more than anything that had happened in that studio, was the real story. Not the host who lost control, not the dramatic exit, not the heated words, but the quiet dignity of an artist who knew his worth and didn't need anyone else to validate it, who could walk away from disrespect without losing himself in anger, who could turn a negative experience into something positive, even if that something was just a private moment with a guitar and a new song taking shape. The interview was over. The show had ended. But the music played on, and that's exactly how it should.